Hey, Mark. How you doing, buddy?
Time for part two.
Yeah, here we go.
All right.
Good. Great to be
We'll
here.
be back
Thank
in
you.
a couple seconds. We just got to get squared around. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Archaeology 101. This is part two, 101, part two of what we started a little bit ago, and that's the crossovers between North America's ancient past and the movement of Europe from across the ocean into the new land, the new country, and the conflicts and the meshing that took place between the natives and the Europeans. So what we're going to do, we're just going to enjoy, talk about, look at some of the stuff. This is certainly not about me today. It's going to continue with Roger. But I did bring a few things. I had mentioned a couple of them before when we got together. In the beads, I didn't mention where I got them. But basically, some of these were acquired from some Lakota people quite a few years ago, back, I believe, late 70s in the county, early 80s. And then others have come from archaeological finds, people I know that dig and have come out of the ground. So that's what we're looking over here. Come in this direction. This is a replica of the trade or throw axes that were going on in historic America, probably the 1800s. And so this has never been used, and it was just made a while back. But contrasting the Iron Age to the Stone Age. And this piece was made by a Lakota, and I traded him 10 mink skins for this. I think I got taken because they were all tanned at Pepe Brothers out in California, if you know where and who they are. And then field finds. And this is fun for me because this represents, just like many of you, hundreds of hours in the field. And so I've pinned a couple because I want to pick them up. I showed you this one a little bit ago. I can get him out of my batting there. This one was my most recent found. This one came from a little town just south of Mansfield. Whoops, he's running away from me. And that would be Lexington, Ohio. And then the others were just random field finds on sites that I have all through the Richland County area. And talking about those, I've got to move to other things. I'm doing this because a lot of you are walking over these things. Probably the gun flints are some of the toughest things to separate from debitage into the possibility of something other than that. I've used the word geometrics, which is just my word saying there's geometry here that goes beyond nature's randomness. And if you notice, each one of these has kind of a telltale square or rectangular part. And this is what your eye will see on the ground. It's going to see that rectangular shape. And this would be a blank. This is pure flint, similar to what comes out of the British Isles. And this is what it looks like before they start using it in their flintlocks. This is a very, very old flint that was in one of the earliest flintlocks. And along with historic artifacts are the slate pencils that are indicative of the 1800s into the very earliest of 1900s. And then we have over here, we have clay pipes. And that's a lot of years of walking that you're looking at right there. Some of them are old, some of them are current. My grandmother, and I'm really not that old, my grandmother used a clay pipe when she wasn't smoking her corn cob. So anyway, there's just such a diversity in these pipes. And to find a bowl in one piece, what an absolute joy. For me, most of them look like this, and this one has been smoked. And you can see the impact of the heat and the charcoal on the pipe. So that's there. A lot of times what you're going to find are these in the field. And one of my buddies said, why are these so, not just the fact that they're out there, but they're so randomly, but about the same size like that. And when I was back in the day, when I was playing soccer in England, we went to a pub and they had a wall rack of pipes. And I'm like, oh man, who's going to want to smoke one of those after somebody else? And the lady that was serving it said, no, what they would do is pick up these pipes, they'd snap the very end off, and then they'd smoke it. put it back up. Next person, snap the end off. And so it's very likely that this was going on our frontier. Who knows? Anyway, so these are just some of the fun things that I brought in, and basically that's it. Our first shot at this, we were looking at the person. We were looking at Roger, and I know that you could feel his heart, soul, the bloodline with his past people. And so we got to know a little bit about this guy, enough to know that he's weird, wonderful, and crazy, and we love him. But now we're going to look at things. Now, I brought in a lot of field finds and some things that I acquired along the way. But slipping on down the line, Roger, do we want to start with you, buddy, what you're wearing, or how do you want to look at
Well,
this?
yeah, I can talk a little bit about our material culture. Basically, in the 18th century, we were done wearing brain tan deer hides and hides once we had contact with Europeans. I don't know if you've ever worn a shirt made out of brain tan deer hide. It's if it gets wet and it dries, it'll dry in the last position that you were in. It's not very comfortable. But when we had European contact, there were wool and linen and things, and we depended heavily on Europeans to get all those things. Basically, everything that I have on that came from Europeans. All the silver. We would do some things. We would get this neck knife. Now, this is decorated with porcupine quills. Now we would tan the hide, and we would work with the porcupine quills to get that. But in order to get the knife, we would have to get that from Europeans. And where that amber bead came from, I have no idea. But that would be another thing that we got from a European. But we could decorate those things with the porcupines that we had around here. And along with that, we would, this is a pair of my leg ties. And there again, it's porcupine quill work on there. Those aren't little beads. Those are naturally dyed porcupine quills that have been flattened, and that is a real art.
Did you do that work yourself?
No, heck no, I can't do that.
Okay.
I have some very talented friends that are able to do that. I attempted that at once, and it didn't take me long to know I'm not ever going to do that. And there again, this is an old beat up bag of mine that's seen a lot of years, been in a bunch of movies, but there again, the decoration on that is quill work.
Is that what they would call possible
bag? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is just a bag we carry our paint in or whatever. But those things we could get on our own. We could, brain tan the deer hide. We could get the porcupine quills. We could dye it with natural dyes. But then we could also use dyes that the Europeans supplied.
Okay.
Cochineal, which made a red dye, and vermilion. We would get that from Europeans to dye with. But all the silver I'm wearing all came from European traders, French and English traders back in Philadelphia and Boston. And I can read to you some of the things from trade lists that tell you all about what the traders were having their merchants make for them to take to Indian towns to trade. And it's unbelievable the amount of silver jewelry and silver, all the armbands, cuffs, these little brooches right here. They're called ring brooches. These were made by the hundreds of thousands in the 18th century, and they served no purpose except decoration. They just made this shirt prettier. But we could also take them off and trade them for other goods. We could take some of those off, give it back to the trader for coffee or sugar or alcohol. So we desired this a lot, and it was mostly done by the men. Our women were sometimes very well decorated, but the men, we were very concerned with our look.
Let me put some feet under these, Roger. Yeah. I had invited a friend, a guest, to join us today, and he had to decline. He had Valentine's Day commitment.
Yeah, don't forget Valentine's Day. I already got it taken care of.
I couldn't make it. But Mark lives up in Lakewood, and he metal detects the Sandusky River and the Maumee River.
Oh, yeah.
And in the Maumee River, when you see the collection of his trade
Oh, yeah.
silver, it's just filled with these, Roger.
Yeah.
Different sizes, too.
Oh, my. Yeah, they get big. They're small. Some very small. But on very small stuff, you'd have to put it on silk because it's in order to put this on, the silk or the material has to go through that hole. And then that has to go through the material, and then now it's attached.
Oh, okay.
Now, sometimes they wanted it, but the material was too thick to go through the small little hole, so then they would sew it on. But most of the time, it was attached like that. And this is just called a brooch, serves no purpose, just makes... just makes the material look prettier.
Well, I think when all of us are looking through some of the books, I noticed you brought a few books.
Yeah.
Roger. And I did too. Let me just mention one of my books real quick.
Sure.
Because I'm fascinated with beads, and I wrote it down because my memory, it's really good, but it's really short. And the book that you can look up on the internet, it's called A Bibliography of Glass Trade Beads in North America. This is the name of the bibliography. These are the authors. And I encourage you so much to go there. It's going to open an entirely new world to you, all about the beads, where they came from, who made them, how relevant they were. So this is my heads up. Okay, brother, you're on.
Yeah. A few days ago when we were here for part one, I told you about my dad's people, what were called the Carmel Indians of Meigs County. There was also another group of Melungeon people that lived in Highland County, Ohio. And this book was written about them. And I just got that not recently. And it's very informative about the Melungeon community in Highland County, Ohio. Gives a lot of names, gives a lot of information. And we were very similarly related to them. As far as I know, there's not been any books or anything written about the Melungeon community my grandparents and my father were from.
All right.
And this particular book right here is written by a friend of mine, Jim O'Neill, called The Bearing is Noble and Proud. And this is volume 1. And it talks about how he puts it in great words, a collection of narratives regarding the appearance of Native Americans from 1740 to 1815. And this isn't something that Jim wrote. These are all narratives, first-person narratives from military journals, missionary journals, of descriptions of people who were there, people who lived with the Indians, who saw the Indians, who traded with them, and describes what they look like, what are they wearing. And this is his second volume 2, which is a list of trade goods from different traders, what they're ordering, what are the Indians wanting. There was a time where there was certain guidelines on how to make shirts. Some of them with ruffles, some of them without ruffles. No color green this year from traders. And this particular
and who's
book,
that good-looking person?
Well, yeah, this book is the very first edition of Robert Griffin's The Art of Robert Griffin, and that's me on the cover about 30 years ago. Griff always made me look better than what I actually look like. But Griff's got 3 books out of his artwork, and if you want to see in artwork what 18th century Eastern woodland Indians look like, men, women, children, in canoes, in village sites, going to war, not going to. He's a tremendous artist and very well known and respected in the historical community. So I brought those books along just for references to.
Hey, Roger, I just noticed something.
What's that?
As I'm going through it, she's wearing a knife also.
Yes.
Just like you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We didn't have pockets. We wore mostly breech clouts and leggings. There's no pockets in leggings and no pockets in breech clouts. Now, we would have maybe a coat, but a lot of times we weren't wearing a coat.
Okay.
But that's a great representation of an 18th century woman. Just sitting around, doing quill work or making pottery or whatever.
On the back.
Yeah, I made it on the back too. That's me and a friend of mine, Jamie. Unfortunately, Jamie's no longer with us, but Yeah, it's just cool artwork. If you want to know what we look like.
Hey, I'm looking at this shell.
Yeah, yeah.
And you shared a cool story before we started. What's up?
Sure. This is you may have heard of the word wampum. It was a reference to money, kind of like 18th century stuff. Before Europeans came, we were decorating ourselves with things, with stone, gorget type things, and
Yeah.
and when Europeans came, they brought beads, which was great. But before that, we wore what was called wampum, and this is actually an original strand of field found wampum. A friend of mine in New York does a lot of field hunting, and he gifted me. I mean, he found those one at a time. I didn't find a string of them.
More than likely Iroquois?
Probably.
Okay.
And wampum comes from that quahog clamshell. And the purple, which there's not a lot of purple in a lot of, they would make beads out of that purple and the white, and the purple was more valuable than the white. Well, it didn't take long before once Europeans got here that they saw how much we desired this wampum, that they would go to glass factories in Czechoslovakia and Poland and other countries, and they would reproduce glass wampum. It was bigger, shinier, and already had holes in them. So once we got access to that, we quit making them like this,
Okay.
Because in the trade list, you can see where they're ordering barrels of it, barrels of they called it black wampum, but it was actually the purple color.
Okay.
And this is just a thing that we wore around our neck as a.
This makes me think of being back in a little eatery on Cape Cod, and we're eating steamers.
Well,
and it's coming out of the shell.
You know where that shell came from?
No.
Captain John's restaurant in Williamsburg, Virginia. I think it was Captain John, Captain something. But they had quahog clamshells on the buffet, and I really didn't like them. But I got some off of the people's plate that left. They left them there. I picked up half a dozen of them. But anyways, that's what we made wampum out of. But getting back to the silver part, once we desired a lot of jewelry. The men did, and we were very well decorated. I mean, we decorated ourselves up pretty well with silver, and it's unbelievable when you read the trade lists how many thousands of dozens of these particular items were made, and they were made by English and French silversmiths, and it's very time consuming. And we're not talking about just one silversmith making this. We're talking about a silversmith who has who knows how many dozen indentured servants working for him and producing these things for the trade.
Now, Roger, when we were talking, I had mentioned the date on this piece is 1666.
That's probably Spanish, isn't it?
It is. The Queen of Spain is on it. It's got a hole. It's been perforated.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been crushed. And you mentioned something about the Europeans who were squeezing these things.
They would put them in between rollers. They would put coin silver. This is coin silver. That's a silver quarter that I heated up and beat with a hammer. Well, it's still pretty thick. Well, they could do that with Spanish silver, beat it till it flattened out, and then they would put it in between two rollers and a hand crank. And as it would go through the rollers, it would flatten it out more. And then they would bite down on the top of that. I mean, tighten that up a little more, thin it down until they could get sheet silver, sterling silver. And then in the process of making these things, they would have a pattern, like say this, a pattern. They would set that on that sheet silver. They would take a hardened awl, and this is used to do scrimshaw work, and it's also used to scratch that material. We would scratch that design in there. Once we scratched that in there, we would take a drill. And that's not a very big drill.
Was there
hand drill?
Was there dentistry?
There was no Dremels. There was no, and we would drill a hole through every opening. Every opening, we would drill a hole. Once we have that little hole drilled through there, we would take our hand saw And I don't know if you can see that blade or not, but it's about the size of a hair. And that goes through the hole that we drilled through there. I'm not going to do that, but because I'll break those out.
Yeah.
I go through thousands of these blades every year. But that goes through, and then we would saw out every opening in there. Once I got that sawed out, then I moved to that, then I moved there, that. So in a lot of these, there's a lot of openings in there. There's a lot of openings that I had to saw through.
They seem labor
So
intensive.
yeah. And then once you got it sawed out, once you have it sawed out, you've got maybe a cross like that. Now I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's some etching along the side, engraving on the side. That's done with a little engraver, and this is called rocker engraving. And
one more time, it's called what?
Rocker engraving, and you'll see why I call it rocker, because you set it down and you rock that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I don't know if you'll be able to pick that up or not, but that design is all the way around the edges, and it just added a little bit of different look. Just about every piece they like that rocker design. I don't know if you can see that or not, but anyways, it's and then they would polish it, and they would make hundreds and hundreds. There's a little blade about got away of things that we depended on. I mean, we had to have those things. We had to have so many of those things. We depended heavily on Europeans to the point where we couldn't live without the things that they brought us. And that made us get involved in wars that didn't have anything to do with us. Because just say we were trading with the French. The French, in the 18th century, we had basically French and English traders. The French were interested in the deer and beaver hides because there was a lot of money to be made back in France for the hat markets. They were not interested in land. The British were a little bit different. They were interested in the deer and beaver hides, but they were also interested in procuring land. So say we were trading with the French that were coming from Detroit, or their traders would come down in several wagons just full of pots and pans and axes and sugar and coffee and alcohol and clothes and just everything. And we were living pretty primitive before we met white people. They had guns and tomahawk. They had all those things. We still had stone tools. We were still pretty primitive until, boom, the traders showed up with all these good things. Well, then after a while, our women, they want to cook on copper pots. They want to cook on iron pots. We're done with the clay pots that they break and all that stuff. And it's kind of like today, like what would happen if they took away our microwaves, our electric range, like today, tomorrow, you're going to start cooking on a stove that you got to put wood in, you wouldn't like it too well. You're washing your clothes with a rock and, down at the river, and so when maybe France goes to war with England, now it's not safe for the French traders to come here because they might get, attacked by the British and all their stuff gets stolen. So now they say, well, we can't come here anymore. And it's like, our world just stopped. And the native people say, what do we got to do to fix that? Well, you got to escort us or whatever to make sure we could get the traders to come back. Oh. So we didn't have a beef with, Great Britain or France, but now they say, well, you join our side, we'll keep our traders coming and you can, when we win, you get some spoils. And so we got kind of sucked into this because we couldn't live without this. We couldn't live without this stuff. So, and that was one of the bad things that happened with trade. Mm-hmm. But we had plenty of deer, we had plenty of beaver, and that's what the Europeans wanted. And we would trade for how much does this cost, and it'd be so many. We still use that reference to money in today's world. Like they say, how much is that book? Well, that's $20. 20 dressed buck hides is what we're still using that word today when we refer to money was, how much was, these earrings and
Roger, I have a question.
Yeah.
The wool blankets that
Yeah.
I see, they have these marks on them.
Hudson Bays or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they'll have
That was for
a
the
4 mark
thickness,
or 3
yeah.
mark or a half. What is that?
That was the quality of the blanket. Like it has to do maybe with the thickness of the blanket, or I'm not a real. I don't know that much about those blankets, but I know that some of them, the more marks are on them, the thicker they are,
Okay.
the heavier they are, the more expensive they are. But the trade was a big deal, and it's hard to imagine how much we were trading for. I can read. This is a list from Sir William Johnson, who was a trader out of New York. Um, probably the first millionaire in the continental United States in the 18th century, and his native name I can't pronounce, but it was called Big Business. Because he was a businessman, but he was really friendly with the Six Nations people and the Mohawk people in New York. I mean, he had Indians sleeping on his floor in his home, and he traded fair, and he intermarried with them, had a couple of different wives, Mohawk women, but he was really a fair guy, and they trusted him. And he supplied, I don't know how many traders he had working for him, but he would place orders with blacksmiths, silversmiths, tailors, coppersmiths, anything that you could imagine in Philadelphia and in Williamsburg and places along the eastern coast. He would order things, have them brought to New York, and he would supply his traders in wagons, horses, and goods, and say, you go to the Shawnee towns, you go to the Delaware towns, you go. And some people were coming to Ohio with his goods, and he would keep track of all that. And all they wanted in return were deer hides and beaver hides. And they bring them back to New York. He gets them to the coast, and if they could make it all the way back to Europe safely, he made a lot of money, and he did. And I've got a trade list from his that I think might have came from one of Jim O'Neill's books. This is in 1764, and this is a list that he sent to King George III in England with his tax payment, because he had to pay taxes on all the stuff that he bought and sold, because he still worked for the crown. So he had to send King George this money and this list. So probably everything on this list is a lie, because he was in charge of telling how much I bought, and this is the tax that I'm going to pay on it. So maybe he was an honest guy. I don't know, but if we could fill out our taxes just saying what we want to say, we might do it a little different anyway. Anyways, this is in 1764, his list of what he bought in 1 year and the taxes he's going to pay on it. 20,000 blankets, 30,000 strouds, which is another blanket, 40,000 shirts, 40,000 pairs of stockings, 5,000 pounds of white wampum, of that glass wampum, 5,000 pounds of that, 20,000 awls, which are like sewing awls, and it just goes on and on. 10,000 looking glasses. Those were for men. The men carried more mirrors than the women did, and they would carry them in little pouches like this. They were only about that big, and so he's ordering 10,000 of them. 10,000 razors. We were not hairless people. We weren't very hairy people. Like I didn't shave my face for the first time till after I was 45 years old. And I still don't have hair on my arm, no chest hair. I don't know if my dad ever shaved, but razors, because up until about, probably the late 18th century, we didn't have long hair. We shaved our heads. The men did. The women had long hair, but they greased it with bear oil to get it greasy, because we had lice. Everybody had lice. It wasn't just an Indian thing. I forget who. There was a guy that was a commander of a fort, Hamtramck, I think was his name, in Michigan or whatever. And he wrote in his journal, he said, even though my men are out on maneuvers, it's as if the barracks are alive with the movement of lice.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So, in order for us to get rid of the lice, as men, we would shave our heads. That was common for 75 years. Shaving our head, except for a small patch of hair called a scalp lock on the back of our head. And the reason we didn't shave that is because if we shaved that off, we wouldn't be able to put this hair roach in our hair. And this serves no purpose. It just makes the back of my head pretty. You know, so
Keeps the rain off your neck.
and also in wars, our enemy could take our scalp and get paid money for it.
You know what, Roger? Everybody's interested in genealogies,
Hmm.
and mine's twofold, but one very deeply rooted in West Virginia, and then from there Germany. But I read the account of one of my ancestor women who was scalped,
Hmm.
and they said, and she lived the rest of her life in deep humility.
Oh, she survived it?
Yeah, they just took a piece of her
Mhm.
scalp off, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered about that.
Yeah. There's accounts and they got paid money. And, that's the very first, people don't understand this. They think why are Indians so offended by like the Washington Redskins and stuff like that? Well, people that know history and Native people know their history. The very first time that scalps were referred to in history are being paid, you're being paid for a bounty to bring into a military person, say, I killed these 3 people and here's the evidence. They used to bring heads, but that got too encumbersome. So then they just accepted scalps. They weren't referred to as scalps, they were referred to as red skins. So that's what offends Native people, being called redskins, because it's actually referring to the bloody scalps taken off of Indians' heads.
Mm.
And but people think it was the color of our skin, and there again, we weren't red skinned, we weren't red people. Even in Jim's books from a journal, there's a Frenchman that describes the color of our skin, and he said, the color of their skin, I know not what it is, for I have never seen one unpainted or unstained. But our babies are the same color as theirs when they are born. So we painted ourselves not like the Western Indians. We're very different than the Western Indians. We ate different. We lived different. We danced different. Everything was different. Those people are darker skinned. Of course, they live in the desert. They're in the sun a lot more than we were. But we painted our skin a lot. Even in here, I think he's ordered 10,000 pounds of vermilion. Vermilion is like a stone that you can crush up and mix with bear grease, and it turns your skin like a dark red color, an ochre color. Well, that vermilion was just for facial and skin decoration. Now, maybe it had something to do with mosquitoes or something. I don't know, but we painted ourselves all the time. We were always painted. Maybe at times of ceremonies or a wedding or something, we might do something special. But there were many times where, like the French guy says, I don't know, I've never seen anybody unpainted or unstained. And that comes from somebody that sees the Indians all the time. So he said, but their babies are the same color as ours. So he said, I don't know what color they are.
Hey, Raj, how about if I would love to have part 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, I know.
Let's do this for today.
Sure.
You are a man full of stories.
I got them.
Is there one or two that we could close with?
Well, I'll tell you one about Chief Hendrick and this Sir William Johnson. Chief Hendrick was chief of the Mohawks and a very influential guy. Chief Hendrick loved to wear British officers' uniforms because they were cool, with the gold epaulets and the gold buttons and tricorn hats. And any painting or drawing you see of Chief Hendrick, he's dressed like a British military officer. Of course, he's got his nose pierced and his ears stretched out and all kinds of things that we did, but he's got British clothes on. Well, evidently, Sir William Johnson, when he sent his taxes in to King George III, King George III was happy. Like, wow, we're selling a lot of stuff. So he commissioned to have this fancy coat made for Sir William Johnson. And we don't know exactly what it looked like, but it said it was gold embroidered, and so it's made for the king to give to Sir William Johnson. So Sir William Johnson gets his coat, and it's pretty fancy. Well, Chief Hendrick happens to see that coat, and he's astounded, like, "Oh my gosh, that is beautiful!" And not long after Sir William Johnson gets a coat, Chief Hendrick comes to him, and Chief Hendrick is in control of 600 or 700 Mohawk warriors. I mean, he's a chief. He's the big guy, So, but he comes to Sir William Johnson, and they're buddies. They're good friends. And he tells Sir William Johnson, he said, "I had a dream." And Sir William Johnson knows that Indian native people kind of think a lot about dreams. He said, "I had a dream that you gave me that coat." Like, oh man, you really? Yep, I had a dream. Sir William Johnson knows that that's a big thing for native people. Sir William Johnson gives him that coat. And who knows how long he has it? Who knows where it's at today? But it was about a week later, Sir William Johnson comes to Chief Hendrick and says, "I had a dream that land on the north and south of the Canada River in New York, that you gave that to me. This is a huge chunk of property that now belongs to the British government, got by Sir William Johnson." And Chief Hendrick knows, I got to do it. So he gives him that land. But then he says to him, he says, I don't know the exact words, but he said, "Henceforth, I think it is best that you and I should dream together no more forever." Well, I just found out not long ago that the next year Sir William Johnson did so well that he paid Chief Hendrick for that land, a fair price. So that's the kind of guy he was. He knew he kind of got ripped off with the coat, but he retaliated with getting a big old chunk of property. But he thought, I think I got the better of the deal. But you know what? I made a lot of money. I want to keep them happy. I'm going to give the Mohawk people a fair price for that.
And you know what? We want to keep all you happy. So somewhere down the trail, I guarantee you, Roger will be back. My friend up in Lakewood will bring in his collection of trade goods.
That'd be cool stuff to see. Yeah.
And it'll be neat because you have information that he doesn't have. What's interesting is that Mark almost has a photographic memory, and he's gone through all the Jesuit priest journals. And he's better than Wikipedia on the computer.
Good for him.
So from Roger and from me, we say thank you so much for spending the last minutes with us. And I guarantee it, we'll be back.
All right, great.